Donald Trump is now on Air Force One heading back to Washington, D.C. after his trip to the Middle East. He celebrated several deals that he struck to boost international investment in the U.S., but he also had a stunning admission today about his tariff plans. He said the U.S. simply does not have time to negotiate individual trade deals with all the countries who want one. As a result, Trump says the U.S. will be sending letters to most countries dictating what tariffs they will face.
We have, at the same time, 150 countries that want to make a deal, but you're not able to see that many countries. So at a certain point over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think Scott and Howard will be sending letters out, essentially telling people, it would be very fair, but we'll be telling people what they'll be paying to do business in the United States. It's not possible to meet the number of people that want to see us.
Joining me now to talk about Trump's overall trip to the Gulf is CNN's Fareed Zakaria. Fareed, it's so good to see you. So this has been a week where the president, at least on paper, has secured hundreds of billions of dollars of deals, if not $1 trillion. He met with the new leader of Syria, the first time that's happened with the U.S. president in 25 years, and also surprised everyone by lifting sanctions on the country. And then he suggested there has been intense progress made on the Iran nuclear talks, saying that they even have a copy of the proposal. Now, the Iranian foreign minister is disputing that claim. But the Qatari airplane, Air Force One gift aside, and the controversy surrounding that, in your view, was this ultimately a successful trip for the president?
Yeah, I think it was a very successful trip. I think you have to be honest. Look, the Gulf has become incredibly important because of the extraordinary amounts of capital that sit there. Much of the oil that they sell to China. So it's been very important to keep it in the American camp. And I think Trump does that. He has a natural affinity to these people because, to be honest, I mean, I think he likes dictators and monarchs because they can make decisions quickly. He likes money. There's a lot of money there. But he reversed the sanctions on Syria. And that's a good example of Trump being disruptive and thinking out of the box in a positive way. Because this would have taken years of reviews and committee meetings before they would have actually lifted them. Trump has done it, very expeditiously, and I think it's probably the right decision to at least give the new regime a chance. He's trying to make a deal on Iran. Again, there's enormous inertia and bureaucracy and politics in Washington that tries to stop it, and the fact that he's willing to think out of the box is good. The bad side to shooting from the hip and disruption for the sake of disruption, of course, are the tariffs, as you led the segment with. He's created this crazy problem for himself. He makes it out like the problem is all these countries are clamoring to do business with the United States. No, the problem is that Trump unilaterally announced tariffs on 195 countries, which make no sense whatsoever. The calculations are based on absurdities. And now that countries are trying to figure out how they deal with it, the administration is admitting they don't have a rational formula that they can use. So they're going to come up with some new arbitrary formula for it. So there you see Trump's disruption, shooting from the hip, lack of preparedness, causing a huge amount of problems. So it is mixed because of that, the tariff reality, but the trip on the whole was successful.
And the clock is ticking on the 90-day pause, both on the universal reciprocal tariffs and on the China tariffs, the former expiring, I believe, in early July. And the fact that we only have one specific deal on the table, and that's been announced between the United States and the UK. And as you know, there's just not enough time to get deals with 150 countries, as the president said today. Does this offer an opportunity to China, which has been trying to showcase itself as a more reliable, dependable trading partner? We know that's been one of the priorities in the president's trip to the Gulf, is to wean those nations away from what has been a burgeoning relationship with China over the last few years. Has this played to China's advantage thus far?
Without any question, it has. Look, the American economy is much, much more productive than the Chinese economy. America is a much better place to do business. It's a much more advanced economy. But you've thrown in this layer of uncertainty about American policy, whereas the Chinese are much more predictable, much more stable. If you're a CEO trying to decide where to locate a factory, how to source your goods, you need to have a sense of what things are going to look like for the next 5, 10 years, right? But if you're building a factory, at this point, how could you make a decision? You don't know what the tariffs on China are going to end up being. You don't know what they'll be on India. So should you move your production there? Well, what if the tariffs on India are as high as they are on China? Should you move them to Vietnam? What are the tariffs going to be there? Nobody knows. And that uncertainty is bad for business.
Yeah, and it came at a time, perhaps even a gift to China that's been dealing with its own economic slowdown and challenges domestically in terms of an aging population, a housing crisis. Let me pick up, if I can, on something that you noted, and that is President Trump's familiarity and his affinity for these Gulf leaders, for monarchs, because the Wall Street Journal has a piece about just that and contrasting it with his at times strained relationships with traditional U.S. allies, namely European allies. The headline of this piece is he calls them handsome, attractive, tough, Trump's romance with Arab leaders. And it lists some of the praise that he's thrown at Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, I like you too much, to the Syrian president he described as attractive and tough, and to Mohammed bin Zayed, the president of the UAE, he said, you're a magnificent man. And that really reminded me of the conversation that Steve Witkoff had with Tucker Carlson a few weeks ago, where he basically suggested that the Gulf was the future of investment, AI, all that we're seeing now, all these deals taking place, whereas he described Europe as dysfunctional and dying. What does this signal to you about the president's view on the world and his foreign policy priorities?
Well, part of it is that Trump is a businessman and he loves the idea of these very, very rich countries, but really very, very rich families. These are essentially families that own the countries, easy to do business with, accommodating. You don't have to worry about parliaments, courts, any of that. I think Trump, warms to all of that. And he finds Europe messy, complicated. Merkel in her memoirs talks about he was constantly trying to strike a separate deal with Germany, and she would have to patiently explain to him that, no, you have to deal with the European Union because that's a collective decision we've made. So, and it's funny how Trump is such a great salesman that when he likes somebody, he starts to describe them as, handsome and winning and things like that, words he's never used for, say, Justin Trudeau or Keir Starmer or any of these people. He was all in on what he likes. What's striking about it is, he said at the Gulf, essentially, my foreign policy doctrine is I don't believe in interfering in the internal affairs of other countries. And he's saying this to a bunch of absolute monarchies who are loving hearing that. Of course, he does constantly intervene in the internal affairs of countries. He's constantly telling the British how they should be handling free speech issues. The Vice President Vance is telling the Germans that they should be recognizing the AfD and incorporating it in coalitions. He's telling the Canadians what to do. So actually, Trump believes in lots of interference, almost all in democracies, and in non-interference in autocracies.
Yeah, important that you picked up on that, Fareed. Really good to have you on. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll be sure to tune in Sunday to Fareed Zakaria, GPS, as always. Thank you so much for joining us.